Welcome to this explainer, where we are going to completely reframe what you think you know about waste management, geopolitics, and artificial intelligence. We usually think of industrial supply chains as purely physical things, right? We picture dump trucks, border crossings, and giant piles of materials. But today, we're diving into how a seemingly mundane, gritty industry is being totally transformed. And they're doing it by treating physical materials as nothing more than a mechanism to acquire highly valuable data. So get ready, because this is going to really shift your perspective.
Okay, let's just dive right into this massive number right here, 3.46 million. That represents the staggering tons of municipal solid waste that Ontario, Canada exports to Michigan landfills every single year. It's a massive and, quite frankly, highly precarious cross-border flow of trash. For decades now, the standard operating procedure has just been packing raw, unverified waste into trucks and shipping it across the border to cheap Michigan landfills.
And this breakdown brilliantly illustrates the sheer physical scale of that corridor. Just look at this. Nearly 15%, literally 1 in 7 tons of all the waste disposed of in Michigan comes directly from Canada. That makes Ontario the single largest import source for the entire state. We are talking about a massive domestic disposal infrastructure in Ontario that leans incredibly heavily on the release valve of the United States border.
But as you can see here, that release valve is under extreme pressure. Ontario is facing a severe domestic disposal crisis that folks call the capacity cliff. They've only got about 9 years of runaway left before the province literally runs out of approved landfill space. And because local regulations make opening new landfills virtually impossible, it's a ticking clock. If that U.S. border suddenly closes, well, that capacity cliff gets pulled forward by 3 whole years.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the convergence of these intense market realities. You've got Washington invoking a 1930s tariff law, Section 338, to slap a 50% tariff on roughly $20 billion of Canadian imports, which hits right during a formal USMCA annual review. Meanwhile, Ontario Premier Doug Ford is under massive pressure to fight and protect his province's vital export border. For the companies actually moving that waste, this kind of geopolitical friction isn't just a headache. It's an absolute existential threat.
So what actually happens to a massive cross-border waste pipeline when a 50% tariff wall suddenly drops? Because the era of cheap cross-border landfill dumping is closing, and it's closing fast. If you're a general contractor, a 50% tariff wall means your waste disposal budget could double or even triple literally overnight. And standard trade agreements like the USMCA offer absolutely no shield against this specific hike. So how on earth does a seemingly mundane industry survive a sudden catastrophic price shock like that?
Well, let's move into Act 2, the Silicon Shield.
This brings us to a really innovative company called 905 Wood and what they call their Sentient Bridge. To bypass these crippling tariffs, they don't use lawyers. They use a highly specialized on-device computing stack right at the construction site. By using a Google Pixel 11 Pro running Android 17 powered by the LightArt AI runtime, their software instantly classifies the diverted wood material as HS code 3825.0. That classifies it as characterized waste, which creates a legally recognized exemption from that trade wall. It literally thinks at the edge, magically converting a chaotic pile of debris into a defined tariff-exempt asset.
Now, the absolutely crucial point here is that all this intelligence operates entirely locally on Canadian soil. They call it the sub-second rule. This classification has to happen in under 500 milliseconds, fully offline. Why? Well, sending data to the cloud introduces a tamper window, it risks connectivity dead zones on muddy, unpredictable job sites, and it can violate data residency laws. By processing everything right on the handset, they ensure regulatory compliance while moving at the incredibly fast speed of an active construction site.
Let's look at how this edge intelligence builds into an airtight workflow. They call it the digital refinery, and it transforms chaotic debris into a cryptographically sealed document in 4 highly orchestrated steps. It starts with the request for quote, moves through that AI compliance gate we just talked about, locks the data down cryptographically, and finally outputs a clean, audit-ready PDF dossier. One single capture at the waste bin feeds the customs document, the provincial manifest, and the carbon record all at the exact same time.
And guys, this isn't just about taking pictures of trash, okay? Through the Titan M2 hardware root of trust on the Pixel device, 95 Wood stamps an unforgeable, undeniable provenance record onto every single physical truckload. It logs the exact GPS coordinates, high-resolution timestamps, the AI's confidence score, and a tamper-evident hardware signature. The load is officially accepted, documented, and verified pure. It's basically a court-ready birth certificate for wood waste. Which perfectly sets up Act 3, the data is the product.
And here is where we encounter the brilliant strategic pivot that completely changes the nature of this entire operation. The wood is the customer acquisition cost. The data is the business. You see, the physical movement of a dump truck full of wood is merely the mechanism they use to generate the real high-margin asset. Hauling wood is a low-margin, politically vulnerable commodity business. But that digital provenance record we just talked about, that is a scarce, recurring, incredibly lucrative data asset.
We can clearly see this value inversion right here. 905 Wood is basically contrasting a low-margin physical liability against a hyper-clean digital asset. On the left, you have mixed construction waste threatened by 50% tariffs and skyrocketing landfill fees. But on the right, you have the digital asset, the verified DMRV data cut, and that data cut is the mandatory entry credential for the highly lucrative high-purity biocarbon market.
Now you might be wondering, what exactly is DMRV? It stands for Digital Measurement, Reporting, and Verification. This unforgeable digital record is exactly what the global circular bioeconomy demands in order to legitimize and sell carbon offset claims. If you want to play in the premium carbon removal market, you have to prove, mathematically and cryptographically, that your source material is clean and untainted from the very beginning. Enter the Puro.Earth biocarbon market. Buyers in this space literally cannot mint their carbon removal credits, which they call corks, without the exact, strict provenance data that this digital refinery pipeline produces. The registry's methodology automatically rejects any contaminated or undocumented feedstock, so the premium tier of this entire market is completely provenance-gated by design. So ultimately, when you really look at it, this company isn't in the waste business at all. They are a highly sophisticated SaaS data pipeline just wearing a dumpster company's clothes. Their true deliverable isn't moving wood, it's that audit-ready PDF dossier. It's the exact key required by the customs broker to clear the 50% tariff wall, and it's the exact key required by the ESG auditor to verify a carbon credit. It proves classification, custody, and compliance all on demand.
This stability model totally immunizes the company against geopolitical market volatility. While legacy waste handlers are sweating over 50% duties and a looming landfill capacity cliff, 905 Wood just secures a USMCA-exempt classification, bypasses those landfills entirely by routing direct to biohubs, and captures software margin carbon dividends. They've completely swapped a dying linear disposal model for a highly resilient, recurring data annuity. Which brings us to a really fascinating realization about the convergence of physical geopolitics and edge computing. Think about it for a second. If trade wars successfully tax and tariff the physical border to waste, provable domestic provenance becomes the only way Ontario's wood reaches the biocarbon market at all. So, who ultimately controls Ontario's circular bioeconomy?
The answer is simple. Whoever owns the unforgeable provenance ledger owns the market. The Sentient Bridge was never just carrying wood across a physical border. It was carrying trust. It provides a verifiable claim that a ton of chaos became a ton of high-purity feedstock. By operationalizing this AI stack to secure industrial leadership, it really leaves us to wonder, what other gritty, everyday physical industries out there are quietly being conquered by the data they generate? Think about that the next time you see a dump truck roll by. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it completely changes how you view the intersection of physical supply chains and data. Catch you next time.